The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Jacksonville's Riverside Park as Betty Ramirez knelt beside a weeping elderly woman on a bench. The stranger's trembling hands clutched a prescription bottle, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I don't understand these instructions," she whispered, frustration evident in her voice. Betty, with her plant guide satchel slung across her shoulder, had spotted the woman during her routine botanical tour. What began as a simple act of kindness, helping an elderly woman read her medication label, would unwittingly connect her to one of Florida's most enigmatic millionaires, a man whose gaze would soon haunt her dreams and upend her carefully cultivated life. "Here, let me help you," Betty offered, her voice warm and reassuring as she adjusted her glasses. At 32, she built a modest but fulfilling life as a botanical guide in the small village of Mandarin, just outside Jacksonville. Her fingers, perpetually stained with soil, gently took the medication. "It says to take one pill with food, twice daily. Are you feeling all right, Ma? The woman, who introduced herself simply as Rose, nodded gratefully. "My son usually handles these things, but he's tied up with his business today." Her accent carried traces of old money and refined upbringing, something Betty rarely encountered in her world of plants and nature enthusiasts. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Betty offered, concerned about leaving Rose alone. "Oh, that won't be necessary. My driver is just over there." Rose pointed toward a sleek black car where a uniformed man stood at attention. "But would you humor an old woman and sit with me a moment? It is so rare to meet someone genuinely kind these days." Betty glanced at her watch. Her tour group had dispersed, and her tiny cottage filled with overflowing plant collections wasn't exactly beckoning her home. "I'd love to." That 15-minute conversation changed everything. Rose Taylor, as Betty would learn, wasn't just any elderly woman but a passionate environmentalist with an encyclopedic knowledge of native Florida flora. Their conversation flowed from medicinal herbs to sustainable agriculture, and before Betty knew it, an hour had passed. "You must attend the Sustainable Future Conference next week," Rose insisted, reaching into her purse for an embossed business card. "My son is giving the keynote speech, and I insist you come as my personal guest." Betty's eyes widened as she read the card. Taylor Organics and Sustainable Ventures. Everyone in the botanical community knew about Taylor Organics, the revolutionary company transforming sustainable agriculture with their premium organic produce and award-winning wines. "I couldn't possibly," Betty started. "Nonsense," Rose interrupted with surprising firmness. "You've shown me extraordinary kindness today. Besides," her eyes twinkled mischievously, "my son could use someone like you in his life. Someone who sees the world through both scientific and compassionate eyes." As Rose's driver helped her to the car, Betty stood clutching the exclusive invitation, unaware that across town, Matthew Taylor was reviewing the conference attendee list, completely oblivious that his mother had just invited the woman who would challenge everything he thought he wanted in life. The Sustainable Future Conference loomed like an emerald giant over Jacksonville's skyline, an architectural marvel of glass and sustainable materials. Betty felt severely underdressed despite wearing her finest emerald blouse and black slacks. Her wildflower tattoo peeked from beneath her sleeve as she nervously adjusted her visitor badge. "Betty, you came!" Rose's voice cut through the crowd. She moved surprisingly spryly for someone who had seemed so fragile in the park. Come. The keynote begins in 20 minutes, and I've saved you a seat in the front row. Mrs. Taylor, I really don't think—" "Rose, please," the older woman insisted, looping her arm through Betty's. "And stop fretting. You belong here just as much as anyone else. More perhaps, since you actually get your hands dirty with the earth instead of just talking about it. Before Betty could protest further, Rose was steering her toward the main auditorium. "My son will be so pleased to meet you," she said, with a certainty that made Betty's stomach flutter with unexpected nervousness. What she couldn't have possibly know was that Matthew Taylor, 38-year-old agricultural visionary and reluctant tabloid darling, was backstage having the argument of his life with his board of directors about the company's future direction, an argument that would make his first encounter with Betty far from the smooth introduction his mother had imagined. Matthew Taylor paced the green room, his tailored suit jacket discarded over a chair, despite his assistant's disapproving glances. At 38, he carried the weight of Taylor Organics with practiced ease, but today, tension radiated from his tall frame. "We are not selling our research to Agronomic Global," he stated firmly, running a hand through his dark hair, now slightly flecked with premature grey at the temples. "They'll patent everything and price small farmers out of sustainable methods. That is the opposite of what we stand for." Board member Franklin Marshall adjusted his glasses with manicured fingers. "Matthew, be reasonable. The offer is unprecedented. Your shareholders are looking for more than just profit," Matthew interrupted. "That's why they invested in Taylor Organics in the first place." His thoughts drifted momentarily to his 10-year-old daughter Lily, waiting at home with her therapist. Every business decision he made considered her future, a world where neurodivergent children like her could thrive in a sustainable environment. His executive assistant appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Mr. Taylor." Matthew nodded, straightening his burgundy tie. "This discussion isn't a tea over, but my mother is waiting. And God help us all if I disappoint Rose Taylor." The board members exchanged knowing smiles. Rose Taylor might be 82, but her influence over both her son and the company remained formidable. Out in the auditorium, Betty found herself seated beside Rose in the front row, increasingly aware of how out of place she felt. Venture capitalists and agricultural technology pioneers surrounded them, their conversations peppered with terms like scalable sustainability and carbon-neutral production chains. "Nervous, dear?" Rose asked, patting Betty's hand. "I feel like I've crashed a party I wasn't invited to," Betty admitted. Rose's eyes twinkled. "The best parties are the ones you crash." She leaned closer, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Did you know my Matthew has raised Lily alone since she was 4? His ex-wife couldn't handle having a child with autism. Decided corporate law in New York was more her speed than being a mother." Betty blinked, surprised by this personal information. That must be challenging for him, running such a large company while being a single father. He manages with my help, of course," Rose said proudly. "But Lily needs more than just her grandmother and her therapy dog, Prague. That silly little beagle has done more for my granddaughter than most humans." She fixed Betty with a meaningful, "Look, Lily loves plants, has a remarkable memory for Latin names." Before Betty could respond, the lights dimmed, and the conference moderator approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, the founder and CEO of Taylor Organics, Matthew Taylor." The audience applauded as Matthew strode onto the stage, confidence in every step. Betty's breath caught unexpectedly. The man commanding the stage bore little resemblance to the privileged millionaire she'd imagined. His eyes, intense and deeply green, scanned the crowd with genuine engagement rather than rehearsed charm. "Sustainable agriculture isn't just about organic certification or premium pricing," he began, his voice resonant with conviction. "It is about creating systems that regenerate rather than deplete, systems that will still be feeding our grandchildren centuries from now." As Matthew launched into his presentation, Betty found herself genuinely captivated. His approach to integrating traditional farming wisdom with cutting-edge technology aligned perfectly with her own philosophy. She leaned forward, forgetting her self-consciousness, completely absorbed in his vision for vertical farming in urban food deserts. Then disaster struck. During the Q&A session, a representative from Agronomic Global stood. Mr. Taylor, sources tell us you've rejected a highly favorable acquisition offer. How do you justify depriving your shareholders of significant returns? A murmur rippled through the audience. Matthew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Taylor Organics isn't tea for sale, he stated firmly. Our mission has always been, even at the expense of fiduciary responsibility. The man pressed, voice dripping with manufactured concern. Rose huffed beside Betty. That snake. They were trying to tank our stock before the quarterly report. Without thinking, Betty raised her hand. Matthew, perhaps seeking escape from the aggressive questioner, pointed in her direction. Betty stood, heart hammering. Betty Ramirez, botanical guide. She introduced herself, voice steadier than she felt. Mr. Taylor, I'm curious. Given your company's focus on ecosystem restoration, have you considered the potential for native medicinal plants to serve as companion crops in your regenerative systems? Some native species actually enhance soil microbiology while providing secondary revenue streams for farmers transitioning to organic methods. The room fell silent. Matthew blinked, clearly surprised by this abrupt change in direction. Then he smiled, not the polished CEO smile from his introduction, but something genuine that transformed his entire face. No. That's actually precisely the kind of multifunctional approach we're re-exploring in our next phase. Would you care to elaborate on which native species we found most promising? As Betty launched into a concise explanation of her experimental work with Florida honeysuckle and silverleaf, she remained blissfully unaware of two crucial facts: that Rose Taylor was beaming with matchmaking triumph beside her, and that the agronomic global representative was photographing her already, determining how this unknown woman might provide leverage against Matthew Taylor's stubborn integrity. The conference reception buzzed with energy as attendees networked over sustainable canapés and locally sourced wine. Betty stood awkwardly by a potted bamboo display, clutching a sparkling water and contemplating a discreet exit. After her unexpected moment in the spotlight during the Q&A, several agricultural researchers had approached her with business cards and questions about her botanical knowledge. There you are. Rose appeared, looking remarkably energetic for someone who had claimed fragility just days earlier. Matthew has been looking everywhere for you. Betty nearly choked on her water. Mrs. Taylor, Rose, I really should be going. I have an early tour tomorrow and... Nonsense, you cannot leave without meeting my son properly. Rose's tone brooked no argument as she looped her arm through Betty's, guiding her through the crowd with surprising determination. They found Matthew surrounded by a small circle of admirers, his tall frame easy to spot. Up close, Betty noticed the subtle signs of fatigue around his eyes. This was a man carrying significant pressure, yet he engaged with each person genuinely, remembering names and specific details about their work. As they approached, Rose cleared her throat dramatically. Matthew, darling, stop monopolizing everyone's time. I've brought someone you need to meet properly. Matthew turned, and recognition flashed across his features. Ms. Ramirez, your question saved me from what was becoming an uncomfortable public ambush. His smile reached his eyes. I'd like to hear more about your work with native species. I am just a botanical guide, Betty stammered, suddenly conscious of her simple attire compared to his bespoke suit. Nothing revolutionary. Don't let her modesty fool you, Rose interjected. Betty has transformed the local tourism approach to environmental education, and she helped me in the park when I was struggling with my medication. Matthew's expression softened with surprise. That was you. My mother mentioned someone had been kind to her, but she neglected to mention it was the same botanist who rescued my keynote. He shot his mother a suspicious look that Rose pretended not to notice. Betty felt her cheeks warming. Anyone would have done the same. I assure you, they wouldn't, Matthew said, his voice quieter, meant just for her. Most people are too busy to notice others struggling these days. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp bark, followed by a commotion near the entrance. A small beagle had somehow made it past security and was racing through the reception, trailing a leash behind her. "Prieg!" Matthew exclaimed. Equal parts exasperated and amused, the dog made a beeline for him, followed by a breathless young woman in a catering uniform. "And I'm so sorry, Mr. Taylor," she called. "She slipped away when I was bringing in your mother's car." Matthew knelt to catch the excited beagle, who immediately covered his face with kisses. "What are you doing here, troublemaker?" He murmured affectionately. Rose bent to pet the dog. "Hello, my darling girl, causing mischief again?" Betty couldn't help smiling at the scene. The powerful CEO momentarily transformed into just a man with his dog. "She's beautiful, and she knows it," Matthew replied ruefully, standing with Prieg now calmly in his arms. "Now she has my daughter as therapy dog, but she seems to think she has the CEO sometimes." "Lily must have sent her to check on you," Rose suggested. "She worries when you work late." Something vulnerable crossed Matthew's face, a flash, of the weight he carried as a single father to a child with special needs while running a corporate empire. It disappeared quickly, but Betty had caught it. "I should get Prieg home," Matthew said. "Lily will be waiting up despite promising her therapist she'd stick to her bedtime routine." "I'll help you," Betty offered impulsively. "I work with therapy animals sometimes for my nature programs. She seems quite energetic." Matthew regarded her with surprise and what might have been relief. "That would be thank you." As they walked toward the exit, Prieg now trotting happily between them. Neither noticed Rose's satisfied smile, nor the photographer discreetly capturing their departure from across the room. Later that evening, after helping Matthew secure Prieg in his electric SUV and declining his offer of a ride home, Betty walked toward the bus stop, replaying their conversation. They'd exchanged numbers, professionally of course, after discovering shared interests in pollinator gardens and native ecosystem restoration. He'd mentioned Taylor Organics had several community education initiatives that could benefit from her expertise. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Prieg insists I thank you again for your rescue. My mother also says thank you, though I suspect she has ulterior motives." "Matthew," Betty smiled, typing back, "Happy to help. Prieg is delightful, as is your mother." She was so absorbed in her phone, she almost missed the newspaper stand with the late edition. When she glanced up, her heart stopped. There on the front page of the business section was a photo of her and Matthew leaving the conference, Prieg between them, with the headline, "Taylor Organics CEO, mystery woman, romance or corporate espionage." But the article beneath contained quotes from sources close to Agronomic Global, suggesting Betty might be a plant. Corporate sabotage disguised as romance to access Taylor Organics' proprietary research. Her phone buzzed again. "Matthew." "Betty, I just saw the article. I'm so sorry. Can we talk?" Betty's tiny cottage in Mandarin felt like the eye of a hurricane, deceptively peaceful while chaos swirled beyond its walls. 3 days had passed since the newspaper article, and her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications. Botanical tours had suddenly doubled in bookings. But the new attendees seemed less interested in native plants and more in catching glimpses of Matthew Taylor's mystery woman. She watered her extensive plant collection with shaking hands, trying to find comfort in the familiar routine. Her kitchen counter displayed today's headlines from the tabloid press. Taylor Organic Stock Dips amid romance rumors, and Who is Betty Ramirez? The botanical beauty captivating Jacksonville's most eligible billionaire. This is ridiculous, she muttered to her favorite monstera plant. We barely know each other. Her phone rang, Matthew's name flashing on the screen. Ed spoken briefly after the article appeared, his voice tight with controlled anger as he apologized and promised his legal team would handle everything. Since then, just occasional texts confirming she was okay and updating her on his progress. Getting the story retracted. Hello, she answered hesitantly. Betty. His voice sounded weary. Can we meet? Not over the phone. There are developments. An hour later, Betty found herself in a secluded corner of Timucuan Ecological Preserve, one of her favorite tucked-away spots for its rare native orchids. Matthew's electric SUV pulled up precisely at the time they'd agreed upon. He stepped out wearing jeans and a simple button-down, a stark contrast to his conference attire, with dark circles under his eyes. Thank you for coming, he said, scanning the deserted parking area. I needed somewhere away from cameras. Has it been that bad? Betty asked, leading him down a narrow trail through palmettos and live oaks draped with Spanish moss. Worse, Matthew admitted, ducking under a low-hanging branch. Agronomic Global is using this manufactured scandal to suggest Taylor Organics is unstable. Our stock has dropped 12%. More importantly, farmers in our sustainable network are getting nervous about our commitment. Betty felt sick, all because of a fabricated romance. Can't you just deny it? That's actually why I needed to see you. Matthew stopped walking, turning to face her. My PR team and board think the best strategy is to lean into the story, but with a different angle. What does that mean? Betty asked, dread building. They want us to confirm we are seeing each other, but position it as a genuine relationship that began when you helped my mother, an authentic connection between two people who share environmental values. He ran a hand through his hair. They think it humanizes the company and counters the corporate espionage narrative. Betty stared at him, speechless. I know it. Asking a lot. Matthew continued quickly. The board has proposed a substantial consulting contract for your botanical expertise as compensation, and of course, you think I want money. Betty interrupted, hurt flashing across her face. That I don't pretend to date someone for a paycheck. Matthew looked genuinely stricken. No, that's not. I meant it would give legitimate business reasons for us to be seen together while making the relationship narrative believable. He sighed heavily. I am handling this terribly. This is why I have people who usually speak for me. Despite herself, Betty felt a smile tug at her lips. There was something endearing about seeing this powerhouse CEO fumble through an awkward conversation like any other nervous man. What about your daughter? She asked softly. Wouldn't a fake relationship confuse her? Something shifted in Matthew's expression, a vulnerability that transformed his entire demeanor. Liliage, that is another complication. She saw your picture in the paper. He hesitated. She's been asking about you, a lot. She rarely shows interest in new people, but something about you. She doesn't know me, Betty said, confused. She knows you work with plants, that you helped her grandmother and her dog. He smiled slightly. In Lily's world, that makes you categorically interesting. She has been reciting facts about Florida's native plant species since seeing your tour guide credentials mentioned. In the article, Betty leaned against the rough bark of a cypress tree, trying to process everything. This is overwhelming. "I know," Matthew said quietly, "and I wouldn't ask if there were any other option. The board is threatening to remove me if I don't stabilize this situation quickly. Everything I've rebuilt, everything I am trying to preserve for Lily's future, is at risk." Before Betty could respond, Matthew's phone chimed. He checked it, his expression darkening. "It's my mother. Apparently there's a reporter at her house asking about how she engineered our meeting in the park." He looked up, eyes troubled. "I need to go. Take some time to think about it, please." As Betty watched him hurry back toward the parking lot, she felt torn between self-preservation and an inexplicable desire to help this man and his family. What unsettled her most, however, was the tiny flutter of disappointment that their potential relationship would be merely for show. That evening, as Betty sat cross-legged on her porch among her container garden, her phone buzzed with a text. Not from Matthew, but an unknown number. "Ms. Ramirez, this is Claudia West from Agronomic Global. We should talk about Matthew Taylor's proposal to you. We were prepared to make a better offer, one that won to damage your reputation." She stared at the screen, realization dawning. This had never been about a rumored romance. It was about forcing Matthew out, and now they were targeting her as another pressure point. With sudden clarity, Betty made her decision, dialing Matthew's number before she could second-guess herself. "I'll do it," she said when he answered, "but on one condition. I want to meet Lily first. If she's uncomfortable with me in any way, the deal is off. I want to confuse a child for corporate strategies." The silence on the other end stretched so long, Betty thought they might have disconnected. "Matthew? Sorry." His voice sounded strange, almost hoarse. "That is the first time anyone has put Lily first in this entire mess, including me." He cleared his throat. "How about breakfast tomorrow? Lily makes pancakes on Saturdays. They were usually inedible, but her pride in them is worth every bite." As Betty agreed and they worked out details, neither could have predicted that Agronomic Global was already setting up their next move, one that would force them to confront whether their arrangement contained more truth than either was ready to admit. Betty smoothed her sundress nervously as she stood on the porch of the Taylor home, a surprisingly modest craftsman-style house surrounded by lush native landscaping. She'd expected something flashier from a millionaire, but the thoughtfully restored historic home with its wraparound porch filled with potted plants instantly felt more genuine. Before she could ring the bell, the door flew open to reveal Rose, beaming triumphantly. "She's here," the older woman called over her shoulder before pulling Betty into an unexpected hug. "I knew you would come around. Matthew has been pacing all morning." "Mother," Matthew appeared in the doorway, wiping flour from his hands onto a dish towel. He wore faded jeans and a simple t-shirt, looking younger and more approachable than Betty had seen him yet. "We agreed you wouldn't ambush Betty the moment she arrived." Rose waved dismissively. "Nonsense. Betty and I are already friends." She winked at Betty. "Prieg is keeping Lily company in the kitchen. She is very excited to meet you, in her own way." Matthew's expression softened into something tender and nervous. "Lily has been practicing what she wants to tell you about orchid pollination since dawn. Just, she might not make eye contact and sometimes she needs breaks when meeting new people." Betty nodded, touched by his concern. "My sister, son is on the spectrum, I understand." Something like relief washed over Matthew's face as he stepped aside to let her in. The interior of the home surprised Betty even more than the exterior. Walls lined with children's artwork, comfortable furniture designed for living rather than impressing, and everywhere, plants. Beautiful, thriving houseplants occupied every available surface. "Who cares for all these?" Betty asked, admiring a perfect string of pearls cascading from a macrame hanger. Lily, Matthew and Rose answered simultaneously. Plants are predictable, came a clear, precise voice from the kitchen doorway. They communicate their needs if you observe correctly. A slim 10-year-old stood watching them, her dark hair pulled into neat braids, wearing a t-shirt with botanical illustrations. Prieg sat attentively at her side. You must be Lily, Betty smiled, keeping her distance. Have I heard you were quite the plant expert? The girl tilted her head, considering Betty carefully. You were the botanical guide who helped Grandma. Dad said you know all the native orchid species in North Florida. Not all of them, Betty admitted honestly. I am still learning about some of the rarer varieties. Lily nodded, seeming to appreciate this candor. I am making pancakes shaped like plant cells. Would you like to see? She didn't wait for an answer before turning back toward the kitchen, Prieg trotting after her. Matthew exhaled slowly. That went well. She doesn't usually invite new people into her activities. The kitchen looked like a botanical science experiment had exploded. Flour dusted every surface, and oddly shaped pancakes cooled on racks. Lily methodically poured batter onto a griddle, creating what Betty recognized as a surprisingly accurate plant cell structure. That's amazing, Lily, Betty said genuinely. You've included all the organelles. Lily's face remained serious, but her eyes lit up. The chloroplasts are green because I added spinach powder. Dad says it makes them healthier, but really, I just wanted botanical accuracy. Matthew caught Betty's eye over his daughter's head, his smile so full of love and pride it made Betty's chest tighten unexpectedly. Breakfast unfolded with surprising ease. Lily dominated the conversation with detailed explanations of her plant breeding experiments in the backyard greenhouse, another surprise Matthew had built for her 8th birthday. Rose occasionally interjected with stories that made Matthew groan with embarrassment, while Prieg skillfully cleaned up any pancake scraps that hit the floor. Later, while Lily showed Betty her greenhouse, Matthew and Rose watched from the kitchen window. She's perfect for you both, Rose stated matter-of-factly, washing dishes. Mother, this isn't tea-real, Matthew sighed. It's a PR strategy to save the company. Rose snorted. Keep telling yourself that, darling. I've watched you check your phone 15 times since breakfast, each time with that ridiculous smile, when she texts you updates from the greenhouse. Before Matthew could protest further, his phone rang. Franklin from the board. His expression darkened as he listened. They did what? He finally demanded. That is not possible without... Yes, I understand. To be right there. Rose watched her son's face carefully. What happened? Someone accessed our research database last night. Proprietary formulas for our soil regeneration project are suddenly appearing in an agronomic global patent filing this morning. He ran a hand through his hair. They were claiming they developed it independently, but the timing... You think they hacked you? Rose asked. Matthew's jaw tightened. No. They were suggesting information was leaked by someone with inside access. They've been named Betty as a person of interest in their filing. Rose gasped. That is absurd. Betty was just meeting us today. She's never had access to anything. We know that, but they were spinning a narrative that our relationship provided opportunity. His voice hardened. They offered her money yesterday. She turned them down and came straight to me. Now they retaliating. Through the window, they could see Betty kneeling beside Lily, both of them examining something in a planter box, their heads bent together in shared concentration. What are you going to do? Rose asked quietly. Matthew watched them for a long moment. Something I should have done from the beginning. Fight back honestly. He straightened his shoulders. Yeah, but first, I need to tell Betty what is happening before she hears it elsewhere. In the greenhouse, Betty felt her phone vibrating repeatedly in her pocket, but ignored it, captivated by Lily's enthusiasm as she detailed her experiments. crossbreeding native milkweeds to create better monarch butterfly habitats. Dad says butterflies are like people, Lily stated, carefully measuring water for her seedlings. They need the right environment to thrive, but everyone focuses on how pretty their wings are instead of what they actually need. Betty smiled, recognizing Matthew's thoughtfulness in the observation. Your dad seems very wise. Lily nodded seriously. He tries to fix everything for everyone. Sometimes it makes him forget to sleep. Before Betty could respond, Matthew appeared at the greenhouse door, his expression grave. Lily, sweetheart, could I borrow Betty for a few minutes? Grandma wants to show you the new bird identification book that arrived. Lily frowned slightly, but nodded, her routine disrupted but managing the change. Will you come back to see the seedlings later? And she asked Betty. I promise, Betty replied, though something in Matthew's expression made her uneasy about making commitments. Once alone in Matthew's home office, he explained the situation, showing her the legal notice on his laptop. Betty felt the blood drain from her face. They were saying I stole your research. That is impossible. I don't know anything about soil formulations. I know, Matthew said quietly. This is my fault. I put you in their crosshairs by involving you in my company's problems. Betty paced the room, anger building. So what happens now? Do I get a lawyer? Will this affect my tour business? Matthew watched her, his expression unreadable. There's a board meeting in an hour. They're voting on whether to accept Agronomic's settlement offer, which includes dropping these allegations against you in exchange for my stepping down as CEO. Betty froze. They were using me to force you out. After everything you rebuilt? It appears so. And you reconsidering it, she realized, seeing the resignation in his eyes. To protect me. Matthew smiled sadly. I've spent my career building something I believed in, but in the process I've made powerful enemies. This company is my legacy for Lily, but not at the cost of destroying an innocent person's reputation. Betty stared at him, suddenly seeing not the millionaire CEO, but simply a father trying to protect what mattered, his daughter's future, and now somehow Betty herself. The realization that he would sacrifice his life's work to shield her from fallout struck her with unexpected force. No, she said firmly. I want to let you do that. Betty, listen to me, she interrupted, a plan forming. Agronomic has one advantage. They think they're dealing with a defenseless botanical guide and a CEO restrained by corporate politics. They don't realize who they're actually messing with. Matthew raised an eyebrow. And who would that be? Betty's eyes glinted with determination. The woman who spent 15 years documenting every native plant species in North Florida, including on land that Agronomic quietly purchased last month for their new chemical processing facility. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photo albums, land that happens to contain 3 endangered plant species protected under federal law. Matthew straightened, understanding dawning. Making their permits? Invalid, Betty finished. Their entire project would be shut down pending environmental review, which would tank their stock price right before their quarterly earnings call next week. For the first time since the crisis began, genuine hope flickered across Matthew's face. That is brilliant, but we do need documentation, expert testimony. And it's good thing you know an expert. Betty smiled, feeling more confident than she had in days. One who has extensively photographed and GPS tagged every endangered species on that property during authorized botanical surveys. As they began formulating their counterattack, Betty's phone chimed with a message. It was from Lily, still in the greenhouse. The Asclepias seedlings miss you. So does Dad when you're not here. He smiles differently at you than at other people. Betty glanced up to find Matthew watching her, something unspoken passing. between them that had nothing to do with corporate espionage or PR strategies. Something genuine that had been growing as steadily and surprisingly as Lily S. carefully tended seedlings. "We should get to that board meeting," Betty said softly. Matthew nodded, but before opening the door, he paused. "Betty, after this is over, when there's no crisis or cameras or strategies, would you consider having dinner with me? Just us, for real this time?" Betty felt her heart beating faster as she realized their pretend relationship had somehow laid the groundwork for something neither had anticipated, something authentic growing from the most artificial of circumstances. "I'd like that," she answered simply. As they left for the board meeting, neither saw Rose watching from the hallway, Prieg at her feet and Lily beside her, all three wearing matching expressions of satisfaction as their family expanded, in exactly the way they had hoped since that fateful day in the park. Epilogue. 1 year later, Betty knelt in the rich soil of what was now called the Taylor Community Botanical Preserve. 10 acres of protected land that had once been slated for Agronomic Global S chemical facility. Children from local schools moved along the nature paths, their excited voices carrying through the spring air as they identified native species on their scavenger hunt sheets. "Miss Betty, is this the right milkweed?" called a small girl, carefully pointing to a plant without touching it. "Perfect identification, Zoe," Betty confirmed, making her way over to the education station where the children were recording their findings. The preserve had become the cornerstone of Taylor Organics' education initiative, bringing sustainable agriculture knowledge to the community through hands-on learning. "She's good with them," came a familiar voice behind her. Matthew stood, watching, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him during their tumultuous beginning. The past year had transformed Taylor Organics, after their evidence of endangered species had forced Agronomic to abandon their hostile takeover. Matthew had taken the company public with an employee ownership model that revolutionized sustainable agriculture businesses. "Not as good as Lily," Betty replied, nodding toward the greenhouse where Matthew's daughter was solemnly teaching a group of younger children how to transplant seedlings, Prieg supervising from a sunny spot nearby. "She's thriving," Matthew agreed, pride evident in his voice. "Her therapist says she's made more progress this year than in the previous 3 combined." Betty smiled, knowing how much that meant to him. The routine helps, and having the preserve so close to home. Having you close to home helps. "More," Matthew said softly, taking her soil-stained hand in his. The simple platinum band on her left ring finger caught the afternoon sunlight, still new enough that Betty sometimes found herself staring at it in wonder. Their wedding 3 months ago had been small but perfect, held right here in the preserve, among the native wildflowers, with Lily as the proud flower girl and Rose beaming from the front row. The Taylor Organics board members, who had once been ready to sacrifice Matthew to corporate interests, now raised glasses to toast the botanical guide, who had saved not just their company, but their vision for sustainable agriculture. "Any regrets?" Matthew asked, his voice playful but with a hint of genuine curiosity. Their journey from fake relationship to real love hadn't exactly followed a traditional path. Betty squeezed his hand. "Only that I didn't help your mother with her medications sooner." Rose, who had an uncanny ability to appear whenever she was mentioned, joined them with a knowing smile. "The best acting job of my life," she whispered with a wink. "I've never needed help reading a medication label in my life, but I knew my son needed someone who saw the world the way you do." "Mother!" Matthew groaned, though his exasperation held nothing but affection. "Oh, please," Rose dismissed with a wave. "You were working yourself to exhaustion. Lily needed someone who understood both her and her plants, and I wasn't hard getting any younger waiting for grandchildren." Betty laughed, resting her free. hand unconsciously on her stomach, a gesture not missed by Rose's sharp eyes. "When were you planning to tell me?" Rose asked, her voice catching. Matthew's eyes widened as he followed his mother's gaze, realization dawning. "Betty, are you?" Betty bit her lip, her planned dinner announcement now happily derailed. "On 12 weeks yesterday. I was waiting until after the Preserve's official opening." The joy that spread across Matthew's face made every challenging moment of the past year worthwhile. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, whispering against her hair, "Thank you for helping an elderly woman in the park that day. Da." As they stood together, watching Lily carefully guiding children through her beloved garden, Betty marveled at how a simple act of kindness had grown into something so beautiful, like the rarest and most precious of Florida's native blooms, requiring just the right conditions to flourish into something extraordinary and unexpected. From across the garden, Lily looked up, catching sight of her family. With Preeg at her heels, she approached them with purpose, clipboard in hand. "Dad, Betty, I've been thinking about expanding the butterfly garden section," she announced without preamble. My calculations show we could increase monarch populations by 28% with proper planning." As Matthew knelt to review his daughter's meticulous notes, Betty exchanged a warm glance with Rose. This unconventional family they built, a botanical guide, a sustainability pioneer, a remarkable child who saw the world through uniquely beautiful eyes, an incorrigible matchmaking grandmother, and one very spoiled beagle, had become something more precious than any fortune or business empire. It was, quite simply, home, the end